What's the problem with sailboats? Why aren't sailboats popular, even though the image of a white sail on blue water is still everywhere? Because the unpopularity isn't about romance, it's about ownership reality. And right now, sailing is getting hit by what you could call the Great Divergence. In the first half of 2025, in a major sailing nation like France, sailboat revenue dropped about 36% compared to the year before. Motorboats also softened, but only about 19.5%. That gap matters because it's not a normal dip, it's structural. In the United States, it's even more brutal. The market moves over 200,000 new powerboats a year. Sailboats move in the low thousands. And the older sailboat fleet is shrinking because the scrap rate is high and new production isn't replacing it. So this isn't sailing is niche. This is sailing is losing market fit. And the reasons are not mysterious. They're predictable. They stack, they compound, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Here's the real problem with sailboats in the modern marine economy. It's not one thing, it's a whole system of friction. Problem 1, the time tax. We live in an experience economy where time is the scarcest asset. People want to arrive, press the button, and be doing the fun part immediately. That's exactly what a powerboat gives you. Show up, turn a key, untie a couple lines, go. The ratio of preparation time to enjoyment time is clean. Sailboats lose right there, because before you even leave, the sailboat asks you to do a job. Uncover the mainsail, often by climbing onto the cabin top, remove multiple sail ties, run the rigging that was stowed to protect it from UV, check winches, clear covers, make sure the deck is ready. That pre-departure ritual can easily be 30 to 45 minutes of physical labor before you even cast off, and then you still haven't sailed yet, because most of the time you motor out to open water first, searching for wind and space where raising sails makes sense, so the sailing gets delayed by more steps. Now fast forward to the end of the day. This is where sailing loses people permanently. Because when you come back tired, you don't get to just stop. You have to drop sails, flake them precisely over the boom, fight wind while you do it, install sail covers to protect thousands of dollars of Dacron from the sun, secure halyards so they don't slap all night and annoy everyone, wash hardware to slow corrosion, coil and stow lines. That post-excursion hour on a hot summer day turns leisure into chores, and the psychological damage is real. Because your neighbor in the powerboat shuts down engines, locks up, and walks to the bar, while you're still sweating with canvas and lines. That comparison is visceral. That's the time tax. And modern consumers hate hidden time taxes. Problem 2, the intimidation barrier. Even before people experience the time tax, they get blocked by the perception that sailing is hard. Sailing introduces counterintuitive physics. Wind vectors, center of effort, center of lateral resistance, heel. And heel is not a small detail. For the uninitiated, heel feels like the boat is tipping over. It triggers a primal fear response. Now add the cockpit. Sailing presents a web of lines and controls with a dense lexicon. Halyards, sheets, traveler, vang, outhaul, topping lift. Each control changes meaning depending on the point of sail. Mismanage that and you can tear sails, break gear, or hurt someone. So the learning curve feels steep. And then there's the most important fear, the stopping problem. A powerboat has a brake in the form of reverse gear, and it's immediate and intuitive. A sailboat has no brakes. Stopping and docking in a crowded marina with crosswinds requires a real understanding of momentum, windage, and prop walk. And people are terrified of docking, because docking failures are public. Everyone watches. It's a high visibility, high anxiety moment. So even people who love the idea of sailing get stopped by the fear of parking it. And that fear doesn't exist in the same way with a powerboat. Problem 3, the slow factor. Most people think this is just about speed. It's deeper than speed. It's range anxiety. Because speed determines what's possible in a weekend. A modern powerboat cruising at 30 knots turns distance into something you barely notice. A 30-mile run is about an hour. That means you can go 30 miles, spend time at the destination, and come back for dinner. The boat expands your world. A sailboat averaging 5 to 7 knots does the opposite. A 30-mile run becomes a 5 to 6 hour leg, each way. That's not a day trip, that's a commitment. So for the modern weekend recreationalist, the sailboat collapses their radius. It confines them to their local bay. To do real distance, you need overnight passages, watch schedules, and endurance. That shifts it from leisure to adventure logistics. And most people do not want adventure logistics after a full work week. They want snackable experiences, maximum fun in minimum time. Sailboats demand surrender to nature's pace. It's romantic, but it's increasingly incompatible with modern schedules. Problem 4. The myth of the cheap entry-level sailboat. This is one of the biggest traps in boating. People see older fiberglass sailboats and classifieds for $3,000 to $10,000 and think, perfect, cheap entry into boating. Compared to the $50,000 plus used powerboat world, it looks like a bargain. But that cheap sailboat is usually a value trap.
Because total cost of ownership does not scale down with the purchase price, a $5,000 sailboat is rarely sail away. It's a project. And marine equipment pricing is brutal. A new suit of sails for a 30-footer can cost $3,000 to $5,000. Standing rigging replacement, which is a safety requirement on a schedule like every 10 to 15 years, can cost another $3,000 to $5,000. And if the auxiliary diesel engine fails, a repower can cost $15,000 to $20,000. So, what happens? A new entrant buys the cheap boat, then discovers they can easily spend $25,000 restoring it. And after all that, the boat may still only be worth $8,000. That's negative equity. It's financially demoralizing, and it creates horror stories. Those horror stories spread, and they poison the market. This is how you get a lemons market, where buyers are afraid because they've seen what happens when you buy cheap fiberglass with expensive systems. Problem 5. The real annual cost is not as different as people think. Fuel is the one category where sailboats clearly win. But the annual liability picture is not transformative because sailing has unique maintenance taxes. You don't just maintain an engine. A cruising sailboat is also a powerboat. It has a diesel engine, transmission, fuel system, oil, filters, impellers, and on top of that, it has the sailing systems: rig, sails, winches, canvas, deck hardware. That's why sailing has what you could call the rigging tax. Powerboats don't have standing rigging that degrades invisibly and must be replaced on schedule to prevent catastrophic failure. Sails are engines that wear out. UV damage and mechanical fatigue mean repair and replacement, so the money saved at the fuel dock often gets redirected to the sail loft and the rigger. In a comparative 34-foot running cost snapshot, the total annual liability came out roughly similar, about £31,000 for sail, mid-£30,000 for power in that context. The difference exists, but it's not a life-changing discount. And that matters, because if the savings are not transformative, people default to convenience. They choose the lower friction option, which is power. Problem 6. The Marina crisis and the fixed keel trap. This one is massive, and most people ignore it until it blocks them. In many prime boating markets, marina occupancy is effectively 100%. Waiting lists can stretch for years, sometimes over a decade. Scarcity raises slip prices, creating a high fixed cost floor. And here's where sailboats get uniquely punished. Small powerboats are trailerable. Owners can store them in driveways, yards, or dry stack racks. They bypass the marina bottleneck. They avoid slip fees. Sailboats can't. Fixed keels and tall masts make dry stack impossible. Trailering a keelboat is real effort. Stepping the mast, specialized ramps, and a lot of work. So sailboats are tethered to the water. They need a marina slip or a swing mooring. And when slip fees rise to $5,000 to $10,000 per year, the math becomes absurd for older boats. It makes no sense to pay $8,000 a year to store a boat worth $5,000. That's how the middle class of sailing gets squeezed out. The affordable 25 to 30-foot cruiser becomes economically irrational. Entry-level keelboats get zoned out of existence by infrastructure scarcity. Problem 7. The silver tsunami. Sailing has an aging ownership base, and it's hitting a physicality cliff. In the U.S., the median age of boat owners reached about 60 in the 2024 to 2025 period. In sailing, it's even more acute. Registered sailboats over 24 feet average about 34 years old, and the ownership base is not being replenished. The boom cohort was the baby boomer generation who drove the sailing wave in the 70s and 80s. Now that cohort is entering their 70s and 80s. Sailing is physical, balance, agility, strength, winching, moving around a heeling deck. At some point, many owners exit the sport or migrate to trawlers and other powerboats. So a huge number of used sailboats hit the market at the same time demand from younger buyers is weak. That's the silver tsunami. A supply glut meets a demand drought, and prices get crushed, which further discourages new buyers because the asset feels like it has no floor. Problem 8, missing millennials and Gen Z. Younger generations face higher housing costs and student debt loads. In coastal hubs, real estate pressure pushes people inland, away from the water, and proximity matters. A boat you can't reach easily becomes a burden. Then you stack on top the pay-to-play shift. Historically, sailing clubs were volunteer-run with low dues. Over the last couple decades, many clubs professionalized. High initiation fees, monthly minimums, paid staff, paid coaching. Racing improved, but access collapsed. Young families and young professionals can't justify thousands in annual dues on top of boat ownership. Now add the cultural problem. In many places, sailing carries a posh stigma. Elitist, blue blazer, closed ecosystem. That alienates younger and more diverse demographics who don't see themselves reflected in the traditional yacht club vibe. And sailing has a social friction powerboating doesn't. Large sailboats need crew. Crew introduces interpersonal stress, finding reliable people, managing experience levels, the skipper-crew dynamic, the stress of a high-stakes cockpit with hierarchy and yelling when things go wrong. For a generation that values low-stress social interactions, that's unappealing, so the recruitment pipeline breaks.
Problem 9. The youth pipeline failure. The old feeder system was youth dinghy sailing, but participation drops hard when kids transition to adulthood. One major reason is the pyramid model. Push kids into high-performance racing and Olympic pathways. That creates burnout. Kids who don't want elite racing or don't make the elite cut often have no place to go. They are trained to race a dinghy around buoys, not to cruise, not to anchor, not to maintain a vessel, not to own a boat. So when they age out, there's no bridge to adult ownership. They leave, and the market loses its future customers. Problem 10. The fiberglass forever problem. This is the environmental and logistical crisis nobody wants to talk about. During the 70s and 80s, the industry made millions of fiberglass boats. Fiberglass doesn't biodegrade. Those boats are now reaching end of life. In Europe alone, more than 100,000 boats a year are abandoned or scuttled. Why? Because disposal often costs more than the boat is worth. So owners abandon them in backwaters, sell them for pennies, or leave them to rot in yards. This creates zombie boats. It depresses the market in 3 ways. 1. Visual blight. Marinas and yards look like scrap yards, damaging the sport's prestige. 2. Market toxicity. New buyers get burned by cheap boats needing massive repairs, and those stories push others away. 3. Legal liability. Governments are starting to use registration databases to track owners of abandoned boats and bill them for disposal. Now add the recycling dead end. Traditional fiberglass hulls are thermoset plastics. You can't just melt them down like aluminum. Landfills have been the disposal method, but landfills in parts of Europe and increasingly in the US are banning fiberglass waste because it's huge and non-degradable. So the cost pressure rises. Recent innovations are trying to solve it. Pyrolysis and solvolysis, including mobile units, try to separate resin from glass fiber. The resin becomes oil and the fiber can be reclaimed. And there's helium resin, a thermoplastic resin adopted in new models, which can be dissolved and recycled at end of life. But here's the brutal part. None of that solves the millions of existing polyester boats already out there. Recycling an old hull is still expensive, often over $1,000 per linear meter. That's a final tax on ownership. It reduces the net value of older boats even further. So you get a market where the cheapest boats also carry the largest hidden liabilities. That's a perfect recipe for unpopularity. Now zoom out. This is why the monohull cruiser is collapsing in popularity, because it's slow, it's labor-intensive, it's physically demanding, and it's expensive to store.
And those traits are the opposite of modern consumer values: speed, convenience, and low friction. So what's growing? The one bright spot in sailing is the catamaran market. It's projected to grow from about $1.47 billion in 2024 to over $2 billion by 2035. And that's not an accident. Catamarans succeed because they solve the monohull complaints. They don't heal. That removes the fear factor. They offer apartment-style living space. That removes the camping on water discomfort. And modern cruising cats are often marketed as motorboats with masts. That's the powerboatification of sailing, and it confirms the thesis. The only sailing segment growing is the one that most resembles the powerboat experience. Now, the industry response is basically two strategies. Strategy 1, shift from ownership to usership. Boat clubs and subscription models are expanding fast. Pay a monthly fee, access a fleet, no maintenance burden, no storage stress, no surprise repair bills. That model naturally favors powerboats because they're easier to fleet manage and faster to turn between users. Sailing tries to adapt with fractional ownership, but it scales slower because verifying skill and safely checking out sailors is harder. So if sailing can't transition into sailing as a service, it risks losing the generation that refuses asset ownership. Strategy 2, technological simplification. Manufacturers are trying to de-skill sailing. Push-button sailing, electric winches, self-tacking jibs, in-mast furling, all designed so one person can manage a big boat without leaving the helm. Assisted docking, cameras and thrusters, even auto-dock concepts to remove the stopping problem anxiety. And electric propulsion, quieter, cleaner, and simpler maintenance profiles compared to diesel, appealing to eco-conscious buyers. But even with all that, the core truth remains. Sailboats aren't unpopular because the dream is dead. They're unpopular because the product market fit is failing. In the 21st century, the traditional monohull cruising sailboat asks for too much. Too much time, too much labor, too much skill, too much fixed infrastructure cost, and it gives back too little convenience, too little range, and too little predictability. So the future splits. Ultra high-end, luxury, automated, often multi-hull, ultra simple, small craft, low commitment, and the middle-class family cruising sloop gets squeezed out by costs, time scarcity, and infrastructure. That's the problem with sailboats. Not romance, not aesthetics, friction. And until sailing reduces friction on time, on skill, on docking, on storage, it will keep losing to the turnkey alternative.